Bala, is it audible now?
Yes, sir. It's loud and clear.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So we've opened this to our attendees. We'll probably just give me a minute. I'm just getting a call from. It's audible, Mr. Katuri. Yes, loud and clear.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I think Jinal has also been able to join. I'm just getting him to speak. Just 1 minute. Just excuse me for a minute, Chan.
Hi, Bala. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Jinal.
Oh,
Jinal, I think we can hear you. Can we just confirm that your audio is all clear so that there's no interruption during the session?
Sure. Let me know if this is audible for you.
Yeah, pretty loud and clear. Yeah.
Okay, great. Sounds good.
Yeah, so I will probably just set the tone. I will also just give a brief that you are connecting from your, through your normal call. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So a very good evening to our panelists for the day and our moderator, and also our attendees from across the country and also from overseas who've joined us for this panel discussion, Trucking Through Uncertain Times, the Road Ahead. So it gives us great pleasure to host this panel discussion as Motor India. My name, N. Balasubramanian, Executive Editor at Motor India, your host for today's session. So we welcome you to this session. We've put together a panel of industry leading experts from across the commercial vehicle value chain who will share their insights on key focus areas to address the short and mid-term challenges in the Indian truck industry. We all know that the Indian CV industry is going through one of the worst crises that has been further aggravated by the COVID pandemic. Today's discussion would not be restricted to the COVID situation. It would also try and address issues that have impeded the growth of our trucking sector for long. So I'd like to start off by giving a quick introduction of our esteemed panelists for today's discussion. Firstly, we have Mr. Anuj Kathuria, a very well-known face in the industry. He is the Chief Operating Officer at Ashok Leyland and is responsible for the medium and heavy commercial vehicle business. Mr. Kathuria has had an illustrious career spanning over 28 years. And at Ashok Leyland, he has held various positions, including Head of Strategic Sourcing, Head of Operations, and Head of Trucks Business and Aftermarket. Mr. Kathuria will be the exclusive commercial vehicle OEM representative in today's panel. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Kathuria.
Thank you, Bala. A pleasure as usual.
Pleasure, sir. Next, we have another very famous and well-respected personality, Mr. Jayant Davar, the founder, co-chairman, and managing director of Sandhar Technologies. Mr. Davar is one of the most well-known personalities in our industry, and he has held offices, both past and present, at several distinguished organizations and associations, including CII, ACMA, ASDC, among others. Mr. Davar will bring in a component supplier perspective in today's discussion. So thank you very much for your presence, Mr. Dabar.
Welcome.
Next in line, we have Mr. Siddharth Bhandari, the Chief Executive Officer of Bhandari Automobiles, a renowned dealer of Tata Motors commercial vehicles and Maruti Suzuki. Mr. Bhandari is also the chairman of the Federation of Automobile Dealers Association, Bengal region, and is based out of Kolkata. And he will be the voice of the dealer fraternity as a representative of FADA in today's session. So thank you also for joining us, Mr. Bhandari.
Thank you so much, Bala, for having me, and good evening to the panelists.
Sure. And the fourth and final panelist or speaker for today, Mr. Sushil Rathi. Mr. Rathi is Chief Operating Officer, Transport and Procurement at Mahindra Logistics, and he's also a director at two of Mahindra Logistics subsidiaries, 2x2 Logistics and Lords Freight. Mr. Rathi has over 35 years of experience in the areas of sales and distribution, marketing, channel management, supply chain management, and business and IT consulting, and completes our panel by sharing interesting insights from an end-to-end logistics solution provider perspective. So we're really looking forward to listening to you as well, Mr. Rathi, and thank you so much for taking time out to join us.
Bala, and good evening to all the viewers.
Sure. I'd also like to introduce our moderator for today's session, Mr. Jinal Shah. I'd also like to share at this point that Jinal has had some internet connectivity issues. He's based out of Pune, and as we are aware, the cyclone is passing through Mumbai and Pune, so he has had some issues, but he has really stretched, and he's actually joined us through a normal phone call. So his video might not be visible, but he is with us and he can be heard. So Jinal is director at Power Systems Research for South Asia, and he has over 15 years of work experience in market research and strategic consulting. His expertise lies in identifying addressable market opportunity, competitive intelligence, business viability assessment, and entry strategies. So thank you so much, Jinal, for agreeing to moderate today's discussion and for also leaving no stone unturned, if I may say so, to actually be part of the session.
Thank you, Bala and team, for the kind introduction and organizing this timely webinar focusing on the way forward.
Yeah, just
As
few
we
quick.
Speak of uncertain.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Jinal. Before I hand over to you, a quick note for our attendees as well. I think we've received an overwhelming response for this panel discussion. I think we have over 200 attendees right now, but I'm sure more will be joining. We will have a panel discussion for around an hour or around an hour and 10 minutes, post which we will have a 10 to 15 minute Q&A. You can feel free to share your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screens. You also have an option for chatting. There's a chat window, but please note this is an informal chat window, and questions that are shared in the chat window will not be taken up during the Q&A. Another quick information, the session is being live streamed on Motor India's YouTube channel. So in case anybody wants to join, they can feel free to do so. A final quick word to acknowledge our sponsors for this event. Firstly, we have Belmarks Private Limited, a leading sheet metal and fabrication component supplier with 8 manufacturing plants catering to the Indian and global CV industry. They're also a specialist in chassis frame assemblies and fully built solutions such as tippers and cargo bodies. We also have Ultimax, a latest maintenance-free new-gen rubber suspension for heavy-duty tippers from Tata Autocomp Hendrickson, a company that has been a major game changer in providing end-to-end suspension solution to Indian CV OEMs. So we thank you so much for your support, and over to Jinal for the session. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Bala and team, for the kind introduction and organizing this, focusing on the way forward. As we speak through uncertain time, I must say the internet was working very fine all through the day until it decided to give up 15 minutes ago. This is how uncertain times we are facing today. Anyway, it's a very warm welcome to all the panelists and the attendees. I'd like to give some background before I open up the panel discussion today. As most of us resume life and work in graded shades one thing looks certain today. The phrase such is history. Today, we probably have all the ingredients a good could find, lower demand and fleet utilization levels, labor and driver shortages, financing and insolvency issues, spends on non-essentials, regulatory challenges, and of course, the slowing GDP growth rate, if I had to highlight some of. The impact of which is visible now and for foreseeable future for the trucking industry. In our estimates, we feel that the heavy industry will probably end up on about 150,000 units or vehicles and this year, and we should be happy if we can get back to 2017 production levels in the next 4 to 5 years. Likewise, the light commercial vehicle segment, we estimate would produce around about 320,000 vehicles and is expected to recover better than MPV to 2017 levels. Both the segments will witness about 45 to 50% drop over 2019 and will mark a decade low production. But let me also add, the world is no different today. An entire global commercial vehicle industry will see a lower demand and hence production in the short term. And this makes it all the more imperative for us to become more competitive and grab as much as opportunity, especially when the world is looking at China plus one alternative. While challenges appear many, despite limited fiscal room, some steps from the government towards reforms come stimulus sectors of the economy. We believe it will help revive commercial vehicle industry in particular. Apart from that, some relief in terms of insolvency filings, moratoriums, loans, and additional working capital assistance should support many value chain during these times. So, as our Honorable Prime Minister has appealed to Atmanirbhar or focus on Make in India, is also another opportunity on demand generation. Well, today's webinar is an effort in that direction to understand from the expert panelists we have on board today on what needs to be done as an industry to emerge out as a winner in this VUCA environment, which is the new normal. With this, let me open the panel discussion, beginning with Mr. Anuj, and fellow panelists can raise their hands should they wish to add or have different viewpoints and make it interactive. At this stage, Bala, I'd like to request that if someone wants to add in some viewpoints, you'll have to help me out because I cannot do the video as of now.
Sure, Jinal. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So, Mr. Anuj, thank you for joining us today. And you have literally seen the commercial vehicle industry tide through many challenges and grow over the years. If you may agree, change and uncertainty have always been a part of the business landscape. However, what I observe is the time frame available to adapt and survive or thrive is shortening, especially in the last 4 to 5 years. Times like these have exposed many susceptibilities across the value chain, demanding almost a 360-degree checkup. What, according to you, are the opportunities or changes needed in this industry as of today? If you may share your thoughts, Mr.
Anuj. Thank you, Jinesh, and thank you, Bala. It's a very pertinent time to have this kind of a webinar because, we are going through a very challenging time. It's not only challenging, but it is unprecedented. None of us, even as recent as maybe 8 to 10 weeks back, expected that the industry would land up in this kind of a challenging situation. But, I do not want to take up time on talking about the pandemic. Each one of us every day have an overdose of information on this. So we all know what are the challenges. But it would be more pertinent in this webinar to share about what do we do in these challenging times. If we go back and we have seen, at least I have seen 3 decades in this industry. So this industry has faced a lot of challenges in the past. More recently, if I go back 4 to 5 years, it started with the demon challenge, We had GST coming along, and the big one that hit the medium and heavy commercial vehicles was the axle load norms. And the last year that we just finished, maybe 10 weeks back, that year, what we were expecting is that would be a year of pre-buy, at least when we were kind of changing from BS4 to BS6 norms. So internationally, if you go and see that whenever a country goes from one emission norms to the other, the year before that is a bumper year in terms of lots of pre-buy happens. And that is what was the expectation. But unfortunately, none of that happened. We had our own challenges. So while the industry was bracing itself and preparing to meet the challenges of the BS6, because auto industry in India was trying to catch up with the rest of the world, we are actually leapfrogging from BS4 to BS6. We are trying to do it in 3 flat years. We have not even been able to recover the investments that were made in BS4 while we started investing on BS6. But since the Indian government had given this challenge to the auto industry accepted this challenge. And today we are proud to say that we have lived up to that challenge and we are ready to have our BS6 products. In fact, all the OEMs in the country have already fielded their BS6 offering. But having said that, the challenge that we are actually faced with is again unprecedented. We have on one side gone with almost 8 weeks of zero sales. This has never happened in the recent past. We are looking at a very weak demand going forward. More than weak, as you said it is the VUCA times. It's very volatile, very uncertain, making it extremely complex. And all of this is leading to a lot of ambiguity. But there are very limited options that we cannot say that we will not, as an industry, we will not face this. These challenges are there, it's a given. Now we have to put our minds together as an industry, as organizations, and as partners to see how we can work together and work in this difficult times. What we have done, and as OEMs, we think that we should take the lead. And what we are trying to do is to also being discussed in various forums, including CII, SIAM. We're trying to see as to how we can at least get some fillip to the demand. We have been requesting for the early introduction of the scrappage policy. We had also talked about reduction in GST. Again, this information around the scrappage policy, the request for reducing the GST rates from the very high 28% to at least bring it down to 18%, if not on a permanent basis, at least on a interim basis. So these are some of the things that we feel would actually help revive the demand. As we all know that for the commercial vehicles and especially for the medium and heavy commercial vehicles, the change of axle load, which was done in 2018, somewhere in the middle of 2018, it has led to a huge capacity which has not yet got absorbed in the industry. We also know that, for the commercial vehicle, the billion-ton kilometers of freight availability is a very important criteria. This, if we go back and correlate over the last 3 decades, you would find that the billion-ton kilometers of freight availability is very, very closely correlated with the GDP growth. So the recent news articles, the analyst views from various consultants, rating agencies about the GDP being very, very feeble, and there is a forecast that maybe in the last 3 decades we have not seen negative growth. We may be looking at a year where we may see negative growth. So if the GDP is actually going to degrow, it is a bigger challenge for us. So the demand is definitely not going to be coming back very fast. Having understood that, we will have to work on various cost measures, which I'm sure each of us in our own ways are starting. But in my view, while costs can help to a certain extent, but it is not going to it's not going to replace or it's not going to be enough if the demand doesn't come back. So we as an industry have to start seriously thinking on what are the demand levers that we should activate? What are the various measures that we should take while we are representing with the government? But that's one side. We are also talking about there is a huge requirement on various infra projects. We know that over the last 5 years, infra projects, especially during, I would say 2017, 2018, and maybe the earlier part of 2019, quite a few infra projects, especially focused around road construction, were picking up. That also slowed down, unfortunately. So there is a lever that needs to be triggered. So if we were to get good infra projects, and the government had started talking about it, the national infrastructure pipeline that was announced of 100 lakh crores was very exciting. And we were thinking that this would help bring back the demand, especially in the tipper segment, and the construction and mining things would open up. That we will definitely look forward to. So in my view, we need to have demand getting restored very, very quickly. And at the same time, during the interim period, while it takes time to get the demand going, we need to brace ourselves. We need to help each other to have more efficiencies. We need to identify all the mudas that are there in the system. And it's not about an OEM versus a supplier or OEM versus a channel. It's the ecosystem that has to work in a very coordinated manner so that we eliminate wastages. We eliminate inventories. We work on a very lean pipeline. It doesn't help to transfer wastage or inefficiencies from one pocket to the other. So we have to take a much larger view of the subject. And I would encourage all of us in the industry to be single-minded in our approach, to work as one big team, to navigate through these difficult and challenging times, and try to see how much of damage control can be done, and at the same time work together to work on the demand side. Because I would like to also add over here that this industry is a great industry. The commercial vehicle industry is rather the backbone of the economy of the country, and this has been there for ages, and I'm sure that this industry will continue to do well. This is an unfortunate period where we are challenged in more than one ways, but I'm sure that in the next few quarters and maybe in the near period, we would be able to come out of this very challenging time. But in the interim, we have to survive. We have to keep our heads held high, and we will do it. So I am personally very confident that as an industry, we will be able to do it. But yes, the short term is not looking very bright. We cannot expect that the demand would come back in a V shape. There are many analysts which are talking about various forms of recovery. Some are talking about a V shape, which will be much faster. The longer drawn, which is a U shape, may take some more time. Even people are talking about W-shaped recovery, wherein we may see demand coming back only to be again going back. Suppose if there is a, after the opening up of the regions or the zones, we may see further lockdowns happening in the period going forward. So definitely we do not know, and we cannot take any bets even in the middle term or the long term. So efficiencies, effectiveness, these two levers would be very important. And we need to single-mindedly work on how do we engage in the ecosystem, including the government, to stimulate demand. So that's the opening remarks from my side.
Thank you, Mr. Anuj, for the opening remarks. And if I understand rightly, the short-term demand drivers are limited to scrappage policy and GST, if I understood rightly from others mid to long term. Do you really feel that given the voluntary nature of scrappage policy, availability from the government to incentive or subsidize will trigger any policy? Would you highlight that a little bit?
Sorry, you got cut off in the last
Yeah.
30,
Your
15
voice was
seconds.
slightly broken. Can you probably be a little bit slower, Jinal? That
let-
might help.
Okay. So if I understand rightly, you're saying scrappage policy in the short term is the only quick demand lever. In my time, the scrappage will trigger demand that it's voluntary and availability with the government maybe focused on
Not able to hear your
really
question
have
very
the
clearly, but
infrastructure in place.
still what I have understood is that you're saying that scrappage policy may not stimulate demand if it is on a voluntary basis. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, actually, see, the government has been toying with the idea of whether the scrappage policy should be mandatory or voluntary. But making it mandatory in today's circumstances, in my view, will definitely not trigger demand because the fleets are not being utilized to their original levels. What we do is we have smart telematics on each of our vehicles. So through that, we monitor the utilization of the fleets, at least of the larger fleet operators. And what we see is that even after the lockdown has started lifting and some mobilization has happened, fleet utilization has recovered only to 50% of the levels that we used to see sometime in January, February, which were never anyways very great. So making a scrappage policy on a mandatory basis definitely is not going to trigger demand. What we are trying to do is that if the scrapping of aged vehicles is incentivized, and especially OEMs, and we have made a very special effort at Ashok Leyland to make our BS6 products where the total cost of ownership is actually superior for the customer as compared to a BS3 or a BS4. So if there is an added incentive from the government side, and along with the government, the industry can rally very closely to ensure that the customer is having enough motivation to go for the scrappage policy. If there are certain incentives, the incentives can be in terms of lower GST or maybe certain other expenses that a customer incurs at the time of buying a new vehicle, whether it is in terms of registration taxes, insurance, various other road taxes. So whatever gets incentivized, in my view, will definitely help because BS6 products, at least from what we have put together, are more suitable and will be giving a better total cost of ownership to the customers.
Thanks so much for.
Yeah, General Siddharth Bandari wants to add his views as well.
So I completely agree with Anuj sir. I think scrappage policy is more of a medium and a long-term policy. Immediately in the short term, if you would like the industry, to react to a beneficial scrappage policy, would require a slew number of incentives. Some of the incentives that we've been hearing are only one-sided, which is in the GST form of GST rate reduction. But several other things like motivating the FTU or the retail customer, the small fleet operator, to give up his old vehicle and in turn take a new vehicle and get a lower road concession on road tax, get priority sector get better rate of interest from the nationalized banks and be treated in the priority sector funding in public sector banks. That's going to help him. The acquisition and the utilization of that new vehicle is going to be a lot lower and will help him continue the business which he was doing using his old vehicle.
Interesting viewpoint to Barton's. Thank you. And we'll update that. Have
General, your voice is not that audible. We'll have to probably just get it sorted out.
Is this any better?
Yeah, this is better.
It- Yeah. So I thought with all these viewpoints surrounding scrappage policy, it would be an ideal time to have an attendee's view on possible impact of scrappage policy. If you would like to run the poll, please.
Sure. So we're just launching a poll. Um, yeah, it should be on your screen. What would be the most plausible effect of a well-implemented scrappage policy? So you're requested to select any two options out of the six listed on your screen. The panelists are also open to actually casting your vote. So feel free to share your opinion as well. We will keep this open for 20 to 30 more seconds. Once around 75 to 80% have casted their vote. Just crossed 50% of polling. Keep this open for 10 more seconds. Close to 70% of the people. Look at the results. Yeah, the results are on your screen. Yeah, so majority have gone for option one, that's boosting new vehicle sales. Around 70% of those who have polled have gone for boosting new vehicle sales. They feel a well implemented scrappage policy would result in new vehicle sales, demand for new vehicles. The second largest one with 33% is a potential GST savings and discounts for new purchases. 33% of our respondents have gone for this option. Okay, in fact, there's another one, 34%. It is to address growing environmental challenge. That is the obvious, another obvious factor involved. So, but I think the decision is quite clear. They feel it will boost new vehicle sales, Jinnah. Over to you.
It's good to know there is some synergy between what the panelists are saying, but like Mr. Siddharth said, if there is a priority sector funding status given, I think so that may incentivize better. So let us wait and see how this scrappage policy really plays out. In between, as we talk about demand drivers in the opening remarks, now I'd like to have some views on ground from Mr. Sushil Rathi from Mahindra Logistics. Sir, as you're aware, we have been 18 months plus kind of a slowdown observed in the trucking industry. From logistics perspective, and add on to that the COVID impact, I believe the mileage pre-COVID and post-COVID scenario may be significantly different. So keeping this in mind, from logistics perspective, what is the impact on demand for trucks you see going forward? If your thought, please.
So let's talk about the current situation. So as the COVID incidents started increasing and the government went for the lockdown, we had twin problem. One, of course, was the trucks which were en route, and a lot of truck were stopped en route because the movement was not possible. Secondly, a lot of drivers also left. They also had this fear, and probably many of them left even the loaded trucks en route and left for their villages. So that was the additional challenge which we were facing. At the same time, since the plant operation and all other thing also came to a grinding halt, obviously there was no new demand for the transportation. So we had to kind of balance between these issues vis-a-vis then starting when the unlockdown started and the industry started working, and especially the government went into the phase one where the essential services were given a permission to start, and and later on the other industry were to start. Today, when we take a stock of the situation, as of this moment, roughly 35% level of operation has come at a gross level. In some industry vertical, it may be higher. For example, in the e-commerce or the consumer vertical, etc., it is much higher. The transportation as well as the overall activity, while in many other it is at a much lower level. So gradually, I think it will improve. But today we are facing another challenge is the availability of drivers. While the activities are starting, but a lot of drivers who have left for their villages, they are not willing to come back. They are not feeling safe, confident, and they don't want to leave their families at this juncture. So that is the other challenge which, as an industry, we are facing, and we are trying to work around that, giving them that kind of confidence in terms of the facilities which will be provided, in terms of the medical screening, in terms of their health insurance, etc. So those are some of the things which are gaining momentum, and idea is to give the confidence to the drivers. Having said that, Mr. Anuj Kathuria talked about the two, three areas which impacted the demand. One, of course, he talked about the GST, and the second was the axle load increase. But from where we sit, when we look at the requirement of our customer, they would like the logistics cost to come down. And both these initiatives, the GST as well as the axle load increase, helped in a big way in terms of bringing down the logistics cost, which eventually the 95% benefit went back to the OEMs itself. Means I'm not only talking about the trucking OEMs, but all OEMs from where the transportation used to happen. And that helped in terms of bringing down the logistics cost, because the same capacity truck could carry maybe 15%, 20% additional load. So PTPK came down, and that helped the OEMs in terms of reducing the overall cost, which they could factor into their product cost. So from my perspective, when I look back, both these initiatives were great help. Of course, that has an impact on the truck demand, and as rightly mentioned by Mr. Anuj as well as Siddharth, is the scrappage policy, which is something I think will help and go in a big way. Idea is not only to generate the additional demand for the trucking, but I think in India we seriously need the high technology to come into place, and that is why the trucks which are running 15-year, 20-year old, if the scrappage policy comes in, and then we are going to have better quality trucks running on the roads, then it will be even safer for everyone. The number of accidents which we talk about probably can reduce. The new technology truck will be better on the fuel efficiency. They are better in terms of their maintenance cost. So it will help everyone. So I genuinely believe that the time has come for the government to seriously look into the scrappage policy and see how it can be implemented.
Mr. Sushil, thank you so much. You add a very important perspective to the discussion. Interestingly, you feel that axle load and GST actually benefited, and it's from the supply to demand perspective, it's a completely 180-degree view. I'd like to add that while we may say that GST is causing the hindrance for new vehicle sales, our observation is that in 2016, 17, and 18, when we saw the impact of axle load and GST, we also saw a very high amount of vehicle sales. So in the same era, we also saw people buying a lot of trucks despite of higher GST. So that's also an interesting fact, that while the industry pushes for lower GST, the customers did pay higher GST in 17 and 18 when we saw historical highs.
So let me
With what I understand,
sorry,
yeah.
if I can just chip in. So
Siddharth,
let
can
me
you be
give
a
you
little,
calculation.
sorry to interrupt, can you be a little louder? Some of them felt your voice is feeble.
Who, mine?
Yeah, yes.
Is it better?
Better, yeah. Please go on.
Okay, so what I was saying is the actually with the GST coming in, as far as we are concerned, the trucking cost, the ownership cost of the new truck actually came down because we had the the benefit of claiming the GST rebate into the cost. So the when I look back, it is not really increased the cost of the truck. And as you rightly mentioned, that is why a lot of my transporter, etc., went for buying the new trucks.
Yeah, Mr.
Very
Anuj,
interesting.
Mr. Anuj wants to add something to this,
Sure.
please. Yes.
Yes, Mr. Rathi, while what you're saying is very pertinent and important for fleet operators, but what we need to do is that when we look at commercial vehicles, we should stop looking at medium and heavy commercial vehicles as one big segment. In fact, there are five sub-segments, and each of them have started playing out very differently. Earlier, okay, all these sub-segments were having a similar kind of a demand cycle, and now what is happening is that the combination on one side of the customer profile is also quite heterogeneous. There are large fleet operators, some of the ones who buy uh, bulk in bulk, maybe 100, 200 vehicles every year. But there are a lot of FTUs, FTBs, first time users, retail customers who are not on the forward charge and they do not have the ability to claim the input credits. So for them, a 28% impact of the GST, that is one. The other thing what we also need to take cognizance of is that many of the fleet operators also who have bought vehicles, and that definitely there is a pull because they have certain input credits that have to be set off. But just look at the number of NPAs when we speak to financials, the percentage of NPAs, especially for vehicles which have been sold to retail customers, first time users, first time buyers, it has gone up exponentially. So, what it means is that while people want to enter this business of transport, because of the volatility in the demand, they sometimes are not even able to kind of pay their EMIs. Their basic the payback is not there, and therefore they end up having NPS. So we need to look at the situation in a very holistic manner. One more aspect which I would like to bring to the discussion is that from where was the demand coming? The demand was coming not from the long haul after the axle load norms happened. The demand was there for the road construction from the mining segment and from the lighter commercial vehicles, the intermediate commercial vehicles, and also the haulage vehicles which were used for e-commerce, two-wheeler, white goods. So there were very specific niche applications where the demand was there. If I take 2019-20, the year that we just closed, the demand for OE sales, actually in the truck segment, I'm talking about the total industry volume and not about any particular organization in specific, fell by 48%. But if I were to just do a deep dive to understand that did every sub-segment fall by 48%, the answer is no. The multi-axle rigids fell by 60% in the demand. But the intermediate commercial vehicles, which are used for the in the hub and spoke model, which is maturing, the last mile, that fell by only 25%. So it is a very and the light commercial vehicles, the demand fell by 11%. So that's a very clear indicator that how the long haul segment, while it has become better because they are carrying more load, it is good for the end customer. But I'm not very sure that it is good for the transporters or the fleet operators because they are not being given the extra, their earnings have not improved. Whereas the cost of operating a vehicle with extra load on it, the cost of maintenance, the cost of consumables, the brake lining, the clutch disc, everything has to be replaced much earlier. So the cost of maintenance goes up. The cost per kilometer per ton, the rates have actually not improved. So in my view, for the fleet operators, the axle load norms have not done much good, other than making road transportation, and that I agree, that road transportation as a mode of transportation has become more competitive if I were to take the larger competition with respect to railways or waterways. So that's the message I thought I should also share with the esteemed panel over here and also all the people who are there on the webinar today.
Thank you, Mr. Anuj, for giving another perspective on the logistics front. And I can see the entrepreneurial spirit right there as you speak. And, if I had to summarize, a couple of things that you did add on is one of the major inhibitors that I also see with a lot of first generation entrepreneurs that I interact with is it's a mindset issue. So we need to have adopt the change very quickly. As you rightly said, agility is the key. More importantly, increasing competitiveness. India is known for frugal, robust, and reliable solutions. I think so. It's now time for us to move from the build to print business models to focusing investments in innovation, design, and R&D, as you rightly have. And you also touched upon the import substitution aspect on electronic components. For years, we have been seeing electronic components imported to the tune of 65-70% is the least I can think of. And with the BS6 electronic content going up, we will be net importers of most of these components. So I do see certainly there's enough opportunity for many of us here to diversify, upgrade, and take these opportunities, I believe. Thank you so much for these highlights. I'd like to discuss more, but in shortage of time, I'd like to bring in Mr. Siddharth here. Mr. Jayant added a very interesting aspect of digital sales channel. While I understand it may be very much possible in terms of two-wheeler passenger cars, considering more learned or more tech-savvy customer base. Do you think so that with the customer profile that we have in commercial vehicles, the brick and mortar will face some challenges from the online platforms, especially in the current stressed operating cost structures that dealers have? Your thoughts on how do we recalibrate the economics for dealers?
Jinal, I think Mr. Davar and Mr. Anuj want to add to this. Mr. Davar first and then Mr. Anuj.
Sure.
Well, Siddharth, I just take on from what you said about the limitations in the number of cost heads that you have. Now, if you go back and see when we were taught accounts in our MBAs or whatever, we were taught the profit and loss methodologies. And there was also a methodology of something called fixed costs and variable costs. Over the past VUCA times, that all of that has changed. There is nothing called a fixed cost or a variable cost. We call everything a dynamic cost. Now, if you look at how traditionally we used to be brought about costs, we used to say, well, we have SAP licenses, for example, or Oracle licenses, for example. And there is a fixed cost. We had to do that. In fact, that had to be raised. During times of COVID, we've gone to those people and said, listen, I am not affording this particular price. Are you prepared to give me my seats of 7,000 sets that I have or not? Believe me, many of them have said next 3 months, no cost. Beyond that, a certain discount. Beyond that, deferment. So you attack everything, whether they were rentals that have been attacked. I was talking to the real estate panel the other day, and we spoke about how costs have been brought down dramatically. Dramatically. If you go back and see the leasing model of vehicles, for example, there was a time there was no leasing models, and then you had NBFCs, and then the OEMs came up with their own finance companies to be able to facilitate finance. That was a different scenario. In the last couple of years, we've also had problems with NBFCs and financing. All of a sudden, everybody wants a credit score, which is not possible for everyone to give. So I think this is time for us to address every cost element, every cost element. Number one. Number two, methodologies of selling, methodologies of facilitating your customer so that the effective cost of the vehicle goes down in one form or the other. If you spend less on a showroom, the cost of the vehicle goes down. If Mr. Katuria spends less in building anything that he does, the cost goes down. I mentioned imports. You import fewer components from overseas in electronics because, believe me, now there are so many people who are doing this in India with bringing the same technologies. It's cheaper to bring down the costs of those by 20% and so on and so forth. So one is this, one is the act of selling and how we can do it better. My point is every cost needs to be addressed for a better experience for the customer, for a better experience of the driver, because he's the one who's actually dealing with your vehicle on a daily basis. How can we generate all of this? Now, all this requires is not just this panel discussion, but a few brainstorming sessions with some smart people with an attribute to myself that says, listen, I am prepared to look at dramatic changes, at innovation that has never been looked forward by before. Concepts are changing, and we will have to think differently and try out a few things. That's it.
Wonderful, Mr. Dawar. Mr. Anuj, you had something to add.
Yes, what I wanted to add to what Siddharth was saying, and even what Jayant is saying, while we have to look at every element of the cost and try to see what can be done about it, but I would like to bring a slightly different perspective. Siddharth, we had done a study some time back to understand that if a customer buys a vehicle from us, and if he were to operate that vehicle for say 6 years, so during the 6 years, which is a typical first user life cycle of the product, he spends close to 3 crores. 3 crores of rupees are spent by him over a period of 6 years, out of which maybe the acquisition cost is only 30 lakhs. So what it means is that he is spending 10%. What we are looking at, what we means the OEM today, along with its dealership and channel, is only looking at the 10%. The remaining 90% is where there's a lot of unorganized sector play. So what we started, and we have done this over the last 2 years, is try to look at the entire wallet of the customer. Not to, when I say to look at the wallet of the customer, the idea is not to get something out of it, but to see what I can put back into his wallet and make his total cost of ownership more profitable. 40% of the 3 crore.
Sorry, do you not?
I can go on and give you the entire picture. But in the paucity of time, what I would like to say is that how do we associate with the customer throughout the product life cycle? Not only just sell him a product and be done with it and wait for him to come back. In fact, Bala and towards whether the dealerships would be relying more on service revenue and parts revenue rather than sales revenue. Actually, I would like to say that it's beyond service revenue. So what we need to do, and I find an opportunity for all three. And Jayant was hinting towards that we have been discussing about the symbiotic relationship between the dealers, the OEMs, and the suppliers. But actually, if we were to really work together, uh, led by the OEMs and the dealerships, and participating equal participation from the supplier community, we can actually put together and address the entire 100% of the wallet of the customer throughout the product life cycle. On your point about whether it would be online versus offline or the traditional way, as far as my understanding goes, for at least the medium and heavy commercial vehicles, as it is, the walk-in customers are very few. Most of the deals are done in their offices. And so what we would like to say is, rather than talking about online versus the normal ways of selling, I would say that going forward, it would be more like a click and mortar, not a brick and mortar, not a click and flicks, but it will be more like click and mortar. So there will be a lot of digital that has to be leveraged. And we have started at Ashok Leyland, we have already started that in a very meaningful manner by having a very robust and an intelligent and a smart sales configurator. So all our dealerships and the OE salespeople are engaging with the customer to capture the requirements in a very robust manner, so that we can funnel them and we can eliminate lot of wastages. Customer should be given the vehicle that he wants rather than trying to sell the vehicle that we are able to produce. So a lot more customization through modularity, which we have worked upon, a lot more intelligent interactions with the customers to understand their business. If I do not understand the business of the customer, then I will never be able to give him the right solution. So the game has to completely shift from a transactional mode into a partnership mode with the customers, wherein the association with the customer is throughout the life cycle of the product, where all of us have a role to play. And I think so. Today, all of this is being done through an unorganized sector. So there are a lot of inefficiencies in the system. So we need to latch on to this opportunity. And one thing which I would like to say at the end is that COVID has taught us that what we used to say as, like we are having this webinar, we are all sitting in our own places, but we are all connected so beautifully. In fact, throughout the day, we have our team meetings on MS Teams or Zoom platforms. This was something which was thought to be not possible even 8 weeks back. So the world has changed and adapted very quickly. So I think as a human race, the adaptability that we have is immense. We have to only challenge ourselves. So if we keep on challenging ourselves, we will be able to reach the new horizons much earlier than we have thought that it's possible. So my suggestions and my advice.
I'd like to take it from there.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chand, you wanted to add?
Go on, Jim.
Yeah, so I'd like to take on from those points on better cost management, improving efficiencies, and Mr. Anuj also mentioned the role of partnerships. I think so. I'd like to bring in quickly Mr. Sushil Rathi, because I feel the logistics segment is a great example of and very critical to bring in operational efficiencies, better cost management, and there is more opportunities to collaborate in the logistics segment. Your thoughts on that, Mr. Rathi?
Okay, am I audible?
Much better.
Very much, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. So Anuj brought a very interesting point that in the whole life cycle, if you see the cost for the customers, when you look at it from a customer's point of view, 10% is what can be influenced maybe by the OEM and the dealership network, etc. And 90% is his operating cost over a period of 6 years when they have taken this example. Now, what are these costs and where exactly, he is not able to run his business in a profitable manner? Because if he runs his business in a profitable manner, maybe he will add a more vehicle and there'll be more demand automatically, which will come even for the commercial vehicle. Now, one of the biggest challenge, of course, is for these people, because the 80% of them are small fleet owners, etc., is to find the backhaul. That is where the major cost happens. And when you will see even on the trunk routes in India, you will find when you look at Mumbai to Chennai, for example, the freight rates are X, while from Chennai, it will be maybe half of that, or maybe at a 50% level, 70% level. So backhaul is one area which impacts the cost of the transporter in a big way. Now, if they have a contract on the other side, it will be good. If they don't, then either they wait and they try to figure out through the local market chain, through the broker network, etc., how to fill the return load. And that is where a lot of time is wasted. And if a truck is not running, obviously there are fixed costs, etc., and then it impacts their profitability. So that is one major thing. Second thing is the bad supply chain planning all across, whether it is at the the shipper end or the receiving end. A lot of time is wasted for a trucker in terms of loading and unloading. Many times in the FMCG, we have seen there is a push sales. So the material is loaded, it goes there, and at the distributor end, it is waiting for 2 days, 3 days, etc. So a lot of time is wasted in that channel. Of course, another thing which is very common in India is there are too many people in the chain. So you have the shipper, then you have the maybe 3PL supply chain player, then you have the trucking companies, then you have the brokers, and then you have the fleet owner. So because of that, also in the whole system, the cost goes up, and to the end fleet owner, the realization which he should get, he may not get effectively. Then there is a problem with the manual process. And this is like, in India today, even today, majority of the companies or the shippers would like to have a physical POD of the goods delivered. And this is something which needs to now change. More so post the COVID event, one has to really see how we can do the electronic POD or online POD, rather than waiting for the physical PODs for the material shipped. One of the major reasons for a transporter to get his money late is always because he has to submit a physical POD, which maybe truck takes a route of 1 month, comes back, and when the driver comes to office, then he deposits the POD, then they prepare the bill, send it to the company, and then get their payment. So that whole process also delays the payment cycle. Now, many of these things, if we try to attack, I think we can bring down the cost both for the shippers as well as the cost element for the trucking companies. And once they are having a lesser cost and better profitability, their overall business will be strengthened, and then they will be in a position to buy. One of the factor or one of the solution possibly for this is the looking at collaborating between the various trucking companies, or using a platform like a freight exchange kind of platform, which will help in terms of managing the reverse logistics in a far better way rather than losing money. And we actually at Mahindra Logistics, we have made several attempts in this direction. We have now collaborated, we have gone ahead and collaborated with other 3PL companies or other transporting companies. Rather than treating them as a competition, we believe that time has come, time is ripe for us to collaborate and see, if I go from Mumbai to Calcutta, can I have a load which I don't have directly with me, but through one of my partner, and in which way we can reduce the overall cost of logistics in this system. So these are some of the ways which we can actively, look at. Some of us are making that attempt, but it doesn't actually, honestly, it doesn't require a government intervention, but it requires industry to come together. And even as a part of CII Logistics Committee, we are trying to push some of this agenda so that, the user companies, the logistics user and logistics supplier, both can come together and find a common platform where some of these themes can be implemented to reduce the cost. And I strongly believe that with the COVID incident, I think the time has come where we should look more digital, more collaborative, and reduce all this waste in the system.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rathi, for I see we are running just over time with our panel, but
Mr. Davar wants to just add a quick point, please. Yeah.
Sure.
Just a quick point regarding connected vehicles, right? I think some people have done an amazing job there. And I was recently in one of my customers' conferences where they gave in data for usage of their vehicles. I can even name them, JCB, for example, spoke about how each one of their machines all over India is connected to them, and they know how much usage is being done by the hour, by the day, by the minute, which is the one. So diagnostic connection today is an amazing tool, not only for service centers, but for companies and for everything. And to have all your machines and all your vehicles going forward, all vehicles are going to be connected if they aren't already, because the cost of connectivity is so small that a dealer knows what is happening, the OEM knows what is happening, the supplier gets to know what is happening. Because it's happened worldwide, this is the best time to launch all of that, to be able to get a feedback and make the experience of a customer, a driver, and the entire value chain much more effective.
Thank you, Mr. Davar and Mr. Rathi for adding a lot of views and some change catalyst pointers. If I had to open up the floor before the Q&A, some summary that I gained from this panelist discussion is that we need to be the change catalyst and not wait for the external demand drivers to really make or give us some opportunities. Agility, collaboration, and increasing competitiveness, as Mr. Dawar also said, and moving from build to print to more towards innovation and R&D, focusing on more solutions, is something that the industry needs desperately. As we may like to conclude that the demand drivers do not look great in itself, and hence we need to do a lot internally as an industry to really move beyond this challenge and make the best as a winning strategy. However, let me reiterate that we are still world's largest two-wheel and tractor manufacturers and among top 5 CV producers. So I believe neither is this the first challenge nor the last one. As Mr. Dawar rightly said, in past couple of years, we have seen many crises and to varying degrees of impact and recoveries have happened, as you rightly mentioned. The silver lining is that, we have gained experience every time, and hence a good crisis like this should certainly not be wasted, and leaders and manufacturers like yourself need to quickly realign and focus on innovative solutions to remain competitive. If I may be allowed the last, sentence before the panel discussion, I draw an analogy from the music industry. I think so, we have some brilliant individual performances, and the time has arrived to play an orchestra to create a symphony, which will benefit the overall industry and India as a country. And this is the need of the hour. We have to stop playing individually and work towards creating a symphony for the betterment of industry. Thank you very much for a really insightful session from all panelists, and I appreciate all the attendees for patiently listening and participating. Over to you, Bala, for the Q&A session.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much. With whatever time we've left, we've received a number of questions. Our team has actually put them in place so that they've grouped it according to the speakers. If we can start with one question to Mr. Anuj Kathuria. Not really a market prediction, but when do you see the tractor trailer and the tipper segment, coming back, demand reviving in these segment, Mr. Anuj Kathuria?
Mentioned earlier, first let me talk about the tippers. We are quite hopeful that if the tipper demand, if the infra projects were to be kicked off, definitely monsoons are never good for the tipper segment. So definitely the Q2 will not be something which we should look forward to. But thereon, depending on the mobilization of the various infra projects, which I feel that should happen sooner than later, if that were to happen, tipper demand would be coming back. But as we speak, the initial demand on BS6 is mainly coming from the tipper segments and the small commercial vehicle. So that is good news. Tractor trailers, again, we'll have to wait and watch. That will take some more time in my view, because there is a unabsorbed capacity that is available in the system, which got created because of the axle load norms being changed. So a 49-ton tractor now can take 55, a 40 can take 46. But to make the new, offerings more attractive to our customers, we have come up with some very innovative solutions, which we will be sharing with our customers. So we are trying to infuse demand, but in tractor trailers, it will take some more time as compared to tippers. That's my answer.
All right. And also a follow-up on how do you see the outlook for fully built vehicles during this period?
Good question. Actually, the demand for fully built vehicles will keep on growing. The reasons for that are very simple to understand and comprehend. One is that with BS6 technology coming in, the customer would not like to take the chassis to the bodybuilder because there are certain other risks associated with integrating the superstructure on the vehicle. The other thing is on fully built, now most of this was being done in the unorganized sector. With GST, the tax net being widened, everybody is coming under the tax regime so that we all have an equal playing field. So even the OEMs, when they do the superstructure and convert to fully built, there would be no disadvantage as such on the cost side. And definitely the quality that a OEM can deliver on the fully built is much superior. So the customers would definitely come asking for that. More importantly, we will be able to customize as per the needs of the customer, because in these times, the customers would be looking for greater customization on their vehicles. So with OEMs being able to do that, and especially at our end, when we are introducing the modular platform, we would definitely be able to do that much better. So in my view, fully built from here on will be the mainstay, and more customers would be coming in by asking for fully built solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Katuria. One question for Mr. Bhandari, specific to the dealer side. What is the current update of the extension of registration of BS4 vehicles that was approved by the Supreme Court in March? Is it still valid? Because we've had multiple lockdowns after the initial lockdown. Your views on that?
So the Supreme Court order was very clear. It was based on the government's at that time strategy that the lockdown would open up on the 16th of April. And that's why they had given us the extension till 30th April. However, since the lockdown continued and the Supreme Court was not in session, so the we've put in our application once again with the Supreme Court requesting them to extend the date since the lockdown has continued. Since the bench is currently one of the judges has retired and the bench is getting reconstituted, so the matter is with the Supreme Court. But the request is there for us to extend that deadline from 30th April to now, once the lockdown has got over on 31st May.
Thank you, Mr. Bhandari. Mr. Jayant Davar wants to leave. Thank you so much, Mr. Davar, for joining us and for sharing your wonderful insights. I think you were very, very emphatic in certain points that you shared. I'm sure these are positive takeaways as we discussed before the session. Thank you very much for your presence, sir.
Apologies for leaving a little early, but I have another one to get to.
Sure, sir.
Thanks to all. It was wonderful and great learning for me. Thank you, Sushil, Anuj, Siddharth, and of course, Motor India for giving me the opportunity. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Jen. Have a nice day.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions for the other panelists before we wind up. One question on the transporter side. Obviously, driver shortage is a very, very important issue that the industry has to address. One is a very generic one on how the industry will handle this challenge. Another one, which is more specific, is what is your view on a centralized marketplace connecting fleet operators and driver through a relay network? Do you feel a driver relay service is viable in the Indian context, Mr. Rathi?
Our driver relay service has been something which has been tried out by a couple of companies. The jury is still out whether that's a good model or not. Apparently, it did initially talked about driver going back home every day. But we have to look at the psychological aspect of the whole business also. A lot of drivers are actually attached to their particular truck and they treat that as their home. And many of them actually are not very comfortable in terms of managing a different truck every time. So there is a lot of discussion which has happened. Many companies have adopted that model. Many are not going for that. And there is no clarity as of this moment whether that is good or bad. Worldwide also, if you see, not many countries have adopted that kind of model. Typically, a particular driver is attached to his truck. And many a time, because there is a owner driver concept also in many countries where the truck owner himself is the driver also. So having said that, whether one finds a great benefit in that, again, I'm saying the jury is yet to be out on that, and there's no clarity in terms of whether it's a good scheme or not.
Okay, right. So that's something that we'll have to wait and watch, right? Mr. Anuj, as an OEM, your take on the driver shortage issue, if you may want to add something. And another question from one of our attendees: how can OEMs better, support the supplier base? Is there a new selection criteria that the OEM should look at to choose their suppliers so that the entire value chain actually grows along with the OEM? Do you have any thoughts on this?
Okay, Bala, first talking about the driver challenge. Yes, the drivers, there is a challenge. We recognize this much earlier than the others. In fact, I know many of you are aware, but for the others, I would like to inform that we run 11 driver training institutes. The first one, which started, was way back in 1995 in Namakkal. Namakkal, as we all know, is the hub for all the long haul vehicles. They have huge fleets. The association has those vehicles. So that is where we started our driver training institute. We have it pan India in many of the states. Lots of drivers are being trained. In fact, if I remember correctly, the last count that I had, that we had trained more than 11 lakh drivers. We have now intensified the training efforts, and we are training many more drivers. While what we are also trying to do going forward is to try to uh, kind of create a platform where the customers, our fleet operators, can get in touch with the trained drivers, and like a campus placement for students that happens with the companies. We can work on that, and many of the fleet operators have shown interest coming forward. So we understand that's on one side training, but that's more importantly, how do we make driver as a profession more acceptable in the social context? So there, one thing which Sushil also touched upon briefly is that they stay away from their homes for long periods, maybe for days together. Sometimes they come home once in a month. So that is something which has its own challenges. The relay, as rightly commented by Sushil, is under jury. Like there's no verdict out as of now, whether it will be the right model or not. But I think it has to be a judicious mix of various models. But on the other side, which we all need to be very, very kind of the other thing which basically makes the driver profession not such a great one is the safety. Many of the drivers are either losing their lives on in accidents, or even if they are driving the trucks because of the basic, uh, the features, the ergonomics of the vehicle being not that great. The lifespan of the vehicle of the driver is rather limited. So what we are trying to do, at least at our end, is to improve the ergonomics of the vehicle, the safety of the vehicle. In fact, most of the vehicles that we offer, the fully built with the factory built cabins, are complying to European safety norms. So what it means is that the drivers are feeling much safer. So while the other challenges on the socio-economic front will continue to be there, but at least on the safety, the life, we are also trying to encourage drivers to take insurances so that their families are protected, their livelihoods are protected. There is this model many of the fleet operators have started, and I should congratulate them on that, is what they call as Chalak to Malak. So a driver can become an owner subsequently. So these are the things which I agree with you, Bala. This has to be more integrated. The entire industry has to work around this. The fleet operators also have to understand that the drivers need to be paid their deserving salaries. Their compensation has to be corrected, and definitely there is no other way out. You have to provide them safer working environment. You have to take care of their health, their insurance, their families back home, and also figure out that how they can be associated with their families better. So this is not one, in my view, it will require equal kind of participation from the government side, from the OEMs, from the fleet operators. So the industry as a whole has to back this up. And we need to understand that these drivers play a very, very important role in keeping the wheels of the country moving. So we should not ignore them. We have to, I don't want to say this, but the fact remains that they have not got their just, whatever was what they deserve. So it's high time the industry recognize this and give them their due. On your second point about suppliers and how suppliers should be kind of the engagement between OEMs and suppliers. Bala, is that your question?
Yeah, exactly, sir. How can OEMs help the suppliers and the value chain evolve or upgrade?
What we do is that we believe in long-term partnerships. If you take the legacy of Ashok Leyland with its supplier base, we have suppliers going back even half a century. And we always believe that we have to uh, progress together, we get rewarded together. We are not only fair weather friends, we are there through thick and thin. We have seen many down cycles and up cycles in the industry. Commercial vehicle industry sees a cycle every 4 to 5 years. So many of our suppliers are getting involved with us, whether it is early involvement during the product development. We have come out with a completely new platform for the BS6, wherein our suppliers started engaging with us almost 4 years back. So the suppliers are kind of engaging with us, whether it is on bringing the latest innovation to the markets. Ashok Leyland has always been known for bringing the best, the innovative technology into the market. We were the first ones to introduce the multi-axle vehicle, the first ones to bring the fully air brake systems. So I can go on and on, but just to give the point that collaboration with suppliers at our end has always been strong, but we are also very mindful of this and we are trying to see how it can be done better because we feel that a robust and a good partnership is one which is fruitful and it is a win-win for both of us. We always believe whether it is our suppliers, whether it is our customers, any other stakeholders, we finally go by our brand promise of Aapki Jeet, Hamari Jeet. So unless I can make my supplier community profitable, I will not be able to kind of progress in my future business. So these are some things which we always will continue to endeavor, and definitely there is some headroom, and we will continue to work on that.
Thank you,
If
Mr.
I may add just
Sure.
one more thing to what Anu just said, because he has touched a very important point about the one of the key stakeholder, which is driver. And while we all talk about the driver training, etc., but I think unless we give him that status in our society, what they deserve, till that time, this problem of driver shortage will never go away. But today, a driver doesn't want his son or daughter to come into this field. They would rather ask them to, be a doctor, engineer, or do something else. The only reason is because there is always a social stigma attached with that if you're a driver. So and I think another interesting thing which he talked about is this is not something which is the job of only OEM or somebody else. I think the whole industry, whether it is the fleet operator, whether it is the third party logistics like us or the OEM, everybody will have to come together to make sure that we give them that required status in the society, make them that their job is so important. And in that direction, for example, some of the activities which we do is we do what we call as a chai pe charcha. Every week, the plant heads and the other operation heads are required to sit with 5 drivers or 10 drivers over a cup of tea just to understand their challenges, their problems, and give them that status that they can sit in front of my manager on a chair and discuss freely these kind of things. But one of the area which is lacking and where probably industry has to seriously look into is the creating facilities for driver near their plants, because many times in large plants, etc., there are not enough facilities for the driver and they need to wait there before unloading, etc. There are no toilets, there are no other facility. So if those facilities also can be created, it will be a very humane thing to do, really. And I think we all actually have to work in that direction to make it happen.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Bhandari. Yep.
I think on the driver front, I think Anuj sir and Sushil sir have rightly pointed out in the commercial vehicle dealership community, drivers have always played a very important role in influencing the decisions of purchase, and we've always treated them as our true first customer when it came to treatment of the driver. If you look at the lounges or the facilities that were given to commercial vehicle drivers when they brought their vehicles have always been at par with the best in the industry. Drivers have always see, so like we rightly said, during corona it taught us how to interact and come closer with our drivers, providing them space to stay and cook food or provide for their shelter. This community needs a lot of support, and I think we together, the three the entire ecosystem has to change their approach, the way we see a commercial vehicle driver. And simple things like educating them not only about their vehicles but how they spend their money, and preparing and making them financially stable. These are things that can really go a long way in improving their standard of living, and also in turn making this profession one where somebody would like to enter to improve his livelihood.
Okay, very well said, I think, Mr. Bhandari. Everybody understands all sides, segments from the ecosystem have to come together to actually support and help the driver as a segment to actually grow. We'll probably take one last question to a couple of the panelists and then wind shortly. Again, another question to Mr. Bhandari. Do you see any future paradigm changes in the dealership business model? There were a lot of things discussed on digital sales. Do you think a joint approach between manufacturers and dealership and dealers that can adopt to the different normals here? Do you think that will be something dealerships should look at, given the current changes that are happening in the industry?
I think that's a very valid question, and this is already happening in the industry, and I foresee us investing more on digital platforms to get closer to our customers. Like Sushil ji said, that there's a lot of scope for us to interact with our fleet operator as well as with our first time customer and our small fleet operator on digitally. The manufacturer when we deal with large fleet operators, they are part of our negotiation criteria. So I think it is only a matter of time, and it is going to be a progressive way forward, where the manufacturer will be going forward with us when we deal with our customers.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bhandari. One final question to Mr. Rathi. How do you think the dynamics of digital supply chain can leverage the benefits of the TCO model, the total cost of ownership, in logistics spent by customers?
So as I mentioned even earlier, for example, when you look at all the manual processes today in the transportation industry, if those can be eliminated and we can move to, let's say, EPOD, etc., this will help both. It will help a great deal to the transport companies, and thereby, the cost which they factor in for the delayed payment, etc., can be reduced and can be passed on to the end customers. Secondly, the larger issue which is around today, or the majority of the cost which is attached to, is the backhaul opportunity. If we don't have the backhaul opportunity today, then the cost for the trucking company increases, and eventually in some form or manner they load it to the shipping companies. So that is where I think a lot work can be done. Some work has already started. For example, some digital platforms have already come, which is connecting the buyer and the suppliers both. And there is more work which can be done in the aggregation of these kind of demands, and finding out how we can convert a lot of one-way routes into a two-way routes, by which we can fly a dedicated vehicle at a reduced cost. So that is where I think companies like us also working very actively in terms of defining how do we optimize cost for our end customer. And eventually, when the wheels continuously roll, even for the truck owner, he is also benefited because his fixed costs are already defined. So by doing the more running, and one of the metrics which we track for many of these our transport partners are in terms of what kilometer they do every month. And that is where a lot of waste is there, whether it is the waiting for load, whether it is waiting for loading, unloading, whether it is waiting for backhaul, etc. If all those things can be cut down, vehicle can be optimized in a much better way, and both the entities can share that benefit, which is the truck owner as well as the shipping companies.
Very interesting perspectives, Mr. Rathi. I think we will wrap up the session due to paucity of time. We've already touched 6:45. I'd like to take this opportunity once again to thank our eminent panelists. Firstly, Mr. Anuj Kathuria, thank you so much for taking time out, joining us, and sharing some very, very interesting and optimistic views on what the industry should be doing to overcome the crisis.
It's always a pleasure to meet up, and thank you all my fellow panelists. It was great being here. Always there is something new to learn, so that's great. And I'm sure that going forward we would be definitely, like, very shortly coming out of this challenging times. And I take this opportunity to wish all of us the very best.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Mr. Sushil Rathi. You brought in a very interesting dimension from a logistics perspective. You shared some very interesting views, and we also had some comments that a lot of our attendees found a lot of value in them. Thank you so much for your participation, Mr. Rathi.
Thank you, Bala, and pleasure is mutual. I also enjoyed listening to other panelists, as well as listening to the questions from the viewers. So it was great. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Yeah, and to Mr. Siddharth Bhandari, you form a very important part of the commercial vehicle ecosystem, connecting the OEMs to the end customers, doing the most important job of actually selling these vehicles. You also brought in a very interesting perspective, Mr. Bhandari. Thank you so much for your presence.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank you, Bala, for having me here. I'd like to thank my fellow panelists. I think it was very enriching. Some of the questions were very articulate and to the point, and I thought they brought in a lot of value to the discussion that we had. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. And also to Mr. Davar, who's left a little early. There are many other questions that have come in. We've not touched upon questions related to buses, for instance. We've kept it particularly to trucks, since this is a truck panel discussion, and also questions related to general segment outlooks. We've not really gone into details. If anybody is looking for any specific details, please feel free to reach out to us post the session, and we'll be happy to try and get them answered from one of the panelists if possible. Finally, a very, very important word of thanks to our moderator for today's session, Mr. Jinal Shah from Power Systems Research. Jinal, thank you so much. Despite, as you rightly indicated, a very, very big uncertainty that the internet connectivity had a problem, but you really, I think, walked the talk by really looking at an alternative and ensuring that your presence was not missed during this session. Thank you so much, Jinal.
Thank you so much, Bala. It has been a pleasure to be a part of this panel, and I look forward that the industry comes over this crisis soon and we benefit and we plan for growth as we move forward. Thank you so much.
Definitely. Yeah, it's our privilege to partner with PSAF as a knowledge partner. Thank you so much. So a final word of thanks to all our attendees who've been watching and listening to the panelists. Thank you so much for your participation. Yeah. So until our next panel discussion, goodbye to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.